What is going on, guys? John Kelly here. We're going to talk Dana White Contender Series. This is week number 5. Before we get started, we're going to go ahead and recap last week. Let me pull up last week's results. So basically, we had the individual bet on Santo Curatolo, and I honestly didn't feel great about it after watching the fight. Like, he just looked completely different on the regional scene, was much more aggressive. Had an Instagram post after the fight saying basically he felt like he was never in the fight, and that really showed. I don't know if it was the size discrepancy or what it was. I mean, credit to Clayton Rodriguez. He looked absolutely dangerous and super big for the weight class. But yeah, Curatolo just never really got his game going. To recap the rest of it, Rosales lost in the opener. Obviously, the broken hand had something to do with it. I thought he might have still edged it out, but it was a close fight. You know, he looked good in round 1. The other 2 rounds were pretty close. And then mentioned Curatolo lost, so the parlay didn't matter either way. Stephen Wynn dominated as we suspected. And then Michael Morales came through with a big upset. Kind of kicking myself for not taking the dog shot there. Was close to pulling the trigger at plus 210. Didn't end up doing it. So that one was kind of haunting me a bit. And then in the main event, we had AJ Dobson come through as the underdog. So not the worst week, but obviously not a good week as well. Just had the one individual bet along with the Degen parlay. And being that our individual bet lost, obviously the parlay didn't come through either. But we're here to get back in the win column. Like I said, this is week number 5. I'm excited. We got a decent card lined up for us, so let's get into it. So kicking things off in the heavyweight division, we have Rizvan Kuniev going up against Edivan Santos. And Kuniev, he's kind of like Alexander Romanov, the budget version. He fought in the same promotion, Eagles Fighting Championship. He actually tried the same forearm choke that Romanov was kind of known for coming into the UFC and got Marcos Rogerio de Lima with it, where he basically just smushes the windpipe with his forearm. They call it a forearm choke because I guess they don't have a better name for it. But he basically, he looks similar to Romanov. You know, he has a big belly, doesn't look super athletic, but he moves pretty well. I think his cardio is certainly better than Romanov. You know, for his size, he actually has decent cardio. He'll look to cage push. He'll look to wrestle. One of his fights on the regional scene, he was struggling with the takedown. He literally held his opponent up against the cage for almost the full 15 minutes, ended up getting a couple takedowns late, but it just shows that even if he's unsuccessful, he'll keep trying for it, and eventually that's going to wear on these bigger guys that he's facing. And Edivan Santos is certainly a big dude. He's 6'7", very powerful, very explosive early in fights, but he's fought maybe the worst or lowest level of competition in Dana White Contender Series history. His opponent record is 31-87. And he fought an 0-8 guy, right, like 2 years ago. They ran it back in February of this year. That was his most recent fight. He beat the dude the first time in like 2.5 minutes. They ran it back. I guess whoever the promotion or his matchmakers were like, yeah, you know what, that fight, we just want to make sure. Now he's 0-10. We just want to make sure that wasn't a fluke. So then he beats him in like 40 seconds. But in between that span, he actually fought another dude that was 1-12. And then they ran it back, but he knocked him out. They ran it back with the same dude like 2 weeks later after being knocked out, and he beats him in like 40 seconds. So, I mean, literally 0-8, 1-12, 1-13, and 0-10, his last 4 opponents or something like that. I mean, it is absolutely brutal. It doesn't mean that he's not talented. It's just the fact that it's a really padded record, you know, and typically those are some red flags that we need to take into account. But in terms of the matchup, you know, 9 of his 12 wins have come inside the first round. His cardio is pretty much untested. He's only seen the 3rd round once, and that was when he lost a decision early on in his career. So I do favor the cardio of Kuniev. Like I said, I think if he can avoid like the early power of Santos, because Santos is very explosive, even though he hasn't been tested, he does have power. He is explosive in the clinch, and obviously they're both big boys at heavyweight. Anyone can land something big, right? But I think over the course of 15 minutes, as the fight plays out, I trust Kuniev more. He's just more well-rounded. You know, his striking, maybe not as powerful, maybe not as explosive as Santos, but then he can go to the grappling, and that's where I think he has a pretty decent advantage here. He just has to avoid the early power. So we're going to go with Kuniev in the heavyweight bout for the first fight of the night. Up next, we have Daniel Zellhuber going up against Lukasz Almeida. This is the lightweight division. Daniel Zellhuber, they call him the golden boy. He went pro at 17 years old. He's only 22 now, but he's 11-0, 7 wins by knockout, 3 straight first-round finishes. Although the dude that he just fought in his last fight, it was his first professional fight. So kind of take that with a grain of salt as well. But he's super long for the weight class. He throws a ton of kicks. He comes from a Muay Thai background, an undefeated Muay Thai background. And you see it in his striking. Like I mentioned the kicks already, but he has a really nasty Muay Thai clinch, heavy knees in the clinch. He's also a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and his defensive grappling checks out based on a couple of his fights on the regional scene as well. So he seems to have all the tools. He is young, but certainly an exciting prospect. And I'm excited to see him get tested here against a game opponent like Lucas Almeida. Almeida's 12-0, 8 wins by knockout, 4 by submission. 8 of those 12 wins have come inside the first round. He's also a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he wants to close distance. He wants to fight in the phone booth and land something heavy. He does have legitimate power. He is aggressive, so there are paths to where he can make this a dogfight and be a live underdog. However, Zellhuber, if he gets stuck at range with the Golden Boy, I think it's going to be a bad night for him. So I do have interest in Almeida as an underdog only if the line balloons out. I think he's plus 140 right now, but if he balloons out to plus 200, then I'm willing to take a shot on Almeida. But at the current price, it's not an individual bet for me, and we're going to go with the Golden Boy. Move over Edmund Shabazian. There's a new Golden Boy in town, and that's Daniel Zellhuber. Up next in the middleweight division, we have Aaron Jeffery going up against Caio Borralho, and this is actually my favorite fight of the night. Aaron Jeffery, you guys probably recognize him from Dana White Contender Series. He fought Brendan Allen on Season 3 back in 2019. He also has a loss to Sean Brady early on in his career on the regional scene. Those are his only 2 career losses. He seems to be pretty well-rounded. He trains at a good camp, trained this training camp at Syndicate in Las Vegas. 7 of his 10 wins have come by knockout, and he actually beat Andre Petroski in LFA last October, and then won the CFFC middleweight title over Colin Huckbody. And so both of those names might sound familiar. Petroski obviously fought on this season of The Ultimate Fighter. Strong wrestler, very explosive, but obviously doesn't really have the gas tank. But it's kind of concerning to me because in that fight, Petroski's known for his wrestling, his striking, he's very stiff. Obviously, he has the muscles and the power, but he's very stiff and he doesn't really set anything up. And he was having a ton of success in the striking against Aaron Jeffery. And even Brendan Allen, even though that fight didn't play out long, Brendan Allen, same thing. Obviously, Brendan Allen, good striker now, but on Dana White Contender Series, at that point 2 years ago, he was known as a really stiff striker, not very technical, and he was having success early in that fight against Jeffery as well. He just eats a lot of shots, and he gets hit a lot by guys that, like I said, just aren't the greatest strikers, and he really struggled with Petroski's southpaw boxing, and I think that could come into play here against Caio Borralho, who is a southpaw striker. He's extremely powerful. He looks to be very dangerous. He also holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He actually lost a grappling match to Jalton Almeida just back in May. Almeida fought on Dana White Contender Series just a couple weeks ago, looked excellent. But 5 of his 8 wins have come in the first round, so he hasn't really been tested as much as Aaron Jeffery, but he's very, very dangerous. He's very light on his feet. He's got heavy leg kicks, but also the 1-2 combination. Very straight down the middle, super powerful. Like I said, I'm impressed with this kid. I think he's going to be a problem here in terms of the matchup for Aaron Jeffery. So I'll be betting Borralho in the plus 200 range if we see that line stick around when it gets released on FanDuel and DraftKings. And he's actually going to be the pick for the Degen Parlay as well. So even though I respect the well-rounded game of Aaron Jeffery, we're going to go with the underdog in Caio Borralho. Up next in the lightweight division, we have Chris Duncan going up against Manuel Gaxhja, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so we're going to call him Manuel to make things easier on me. But Duncan, I honestly think is going to smash him here. He's 7-0, 6 wins coming by knockout. He's going to have a big size and power advantage in this matchup. He's also much more battle-tested. He had a lengthy amateur career. He's had multiple fights over in Bellator. And last but not least, we have a baby narrative in play, and that was on me for getting the baby narrative wrong with Santo Curatolo last week. I forgot to factor in that Curatolo was expecting a baby in January. We need the baby narrative for the people that have already had the baby. So Chris Duncan and his girl, they had a baby, I believe, back in May. So we do have a baby narrative here in play. Chris Duncan, just throwing that out there. But in terms of the matchup against Manuel, like I said, he's going to be a lot smaller, size disadvantage. He previously fought at 145 pounds. He comes from the Albanian regional scene, which is pretty low level. and he's actually never fought an opponent with a winning record. So this is certainly going to be his toughest test to date, not just the size disadvantage against a dangerous striker like Chris Duncan, but also it's the only time he's faced a guy with a winning record. And he's not terrible. Like, I don't want to completely discredit him. He's a former Taekwondo world champion, has that flashy kicking style, question mark kick, push kicks, spinning back kicks. You'll see all of it likely from Manuel, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think Duncan swarms him. I think he probably gets him out of here early. So we're going with Chris Duncan, who's likely going to be a heavy favorite for the Degen parlay. And rounding things out in the main event, this one's at light heavyweight. We have Lukasz Sudolski going up against Igor Poterya. And Sudolski's 8-0. 5 of his 8 wins have come by knockout. He's only seen the third round once in his career. He fights over in the Babylon MMA regional scene, which is relatively low. But again, you know, sometimes you just don't know. Like, we saw it with Kleitz and Rodriguez. Like, I don't think Jungle Fight Promotion is all that great, but then he looked like an absolute killer last week. So I don't want to completely, like, that's certainly not the end all be all. And I want to make that clear because I know there was a few people in the comments last week, and that was my fault. I should have elaborated more on the matchup, not just where they trained or where they fought, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of this matchup against Igor Poterya, 13 of his 18 wins have come in the first round. Of those 18 victories, only 3 opponents had a winning record. So you kind of have to peel back the layers a little bit. It's not as good as it actually looks. And I do think he's a little bit more well-rounded than Sudolski, but Sudolski's definitely more dangerous on the feet, and I think Sudolski's more likely to finish by knockout early in this fight. And Poterya's, like, his path to victory is basically like avoiding the power shots early and then kind of withstanding the early storm and hoping that Sudolski kind of gasses out to where Poterya can take over late. But in terms of the skill set, like, I really just don't see it. Like, he's not bad, but he's really just not good anywhere. So I think Sudolski likely gets him out of there pretty early. It's light heavyweight. Both of these guys are big. Both of them have power, but I'm going to favor the guy who I think is more powerful and more dangerous on the feet, where I think this fight plays out, and that's Lukasz Sudolski. All right, so to recap things for the Degen parlay, in the first fight, we're going with my guy, Rizvan Kuniev. Like I said, I think he's more well-rounded, likely will have a cardio edge as well. And I just think the well-rounded game where he can mix in the wrestling, he can control him against the cage, that's going to wear on Edivan Santos. We're going with him in the first fight. Next fight up, we're going with the golden boy, Daniel Zellhuber. I'm excited to see him get a legitimate test against Lucas Almeida, but like I said, I think if this fight gets stuck at range, I strongly favor Zellhuber, who's going to have the technical Muay Thai background. If this fight gets in the clinch, I favor him as well. I just think Almeida pretty much has to close distance and fight in the phone booth, and I'm not sure that Zellhuber is going to allow him to do that. And then if this fight does go to the ground, which I don't really think it does, but Zellhuber would have an advantage there as well. So we're going with the golden boy in the second fight. And then in the third fight, the first underdog, we're going with Caio Borralho over Aaron Jeffery. Like I said, Jeffery just kind of eats too many shots for me to feel comfortable with, especially against a dangerous striker like Caio Borralho, who's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And we saw Aaron Jeffery give up his neck to Brendan Allen and tap relatively quickly. I know he's improved a little bit since then, but I just think Borralho has more ways to win, and he's a dangerous guy, and we're getting a big number on him. So he's going to be the underdog pick in the third fight of the night. Up next, Chris Duncan over Manuel. Like I said, this one, you know, I don't really have much to break down here. I think Duncan's going to be bigger. He's going to be stronger, more physical, and I think he's just a lot more dangerous. I think he swarms Manuel and gets him out of there relatively early. And then in the main event, we're going with Lukasz Sudolski. Both guys are big. Both guys have power. I'm going to lean with the guy who's a little bit bigger, a little bit more powerful, who I think is more dangerous and more likely to finish the fight early, whereas Poterya doesn't really have anywhere in the fight where I can see a clear edge for him. So we're going with Sudolski. We got 4 favorites, 1 underdog. As always, guys, I'm going to drop in the comments a link to my website where you can find whoever I end up betting for the final card. I'm going to put a link to my website. I'm going to post my actual final plays, what odds I got them at, and the final Degen parlay as well. I definitely appreciate the support, guys. If you didn't hate the video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Good luck on Tuesday, and we'll be back next week for week 6.